Good morning. The title of this sermon is Theology Can Really Matter a Lot. 30 years ago this June, I was ordained an elder in the United Methodist Church. Our system at that time, it's changed a little since then, had two levels of ordination. The first level of ordination was called deacon's orders. And after you were ordained a deacon, you entered into an intensive theological refining processes that was called the Ministerial Applicants Committee, or MAC for short. You were in the MAC training process for a minimum of 2 years. During that time, you were interviewed by the MAC committee at least twice. Those interviews were referred to by the phrase trial by fire. The MAC interview committee would grill you for about 90 minutes in each interview. Theological questions about grace and salvation, questions about evil and predestination. You had to know those big 50-cent words like sanctification and eschatology. These trial by fire interviews, which Neil and I were fondly remembering this last week, were feared. They were stories of people freezing up, stories of people saying stupid things or bursting into tears or even storming out of the room. A candidate for elder's orders could be in this trial process by fire for just 2 years if they went through it quickly, or as long as 7 years. Neil and I were in the process for just 2 years. Point Pleasant doesn't know how lucky they are to get persons who sailed through the minimum 2 years of the Ministerial Applicants Committee. Now, if you looked at the interview process and then imagine what it was preparing you for in the local church, you would be misguided. Neither Point Pleasant nor any other of the 4 churches that I've pastored provided a steady stream of persons scheduling time with the minister to talk about sanctification or eschatology. In fact, over the years, I've heard many United Methodist pastors, as well as pastors from other denominations, say that the ordination process was very disconnected from what happens in the local church. The idea that the pastor is the chief theologian of the congregation means very little to most church folks. I've even heard both pastors and laypersons say, theology really doesn't matter much. The truth is that theology really doesn't matter until it matters. And then it can be like the title of the sermon, theology can really matter a lot. To understand when theology matters a lot, we're going to look at a major issue during the time of Jesus, a theological concept that people very much like to think about, chosenness. Chosenness for the Jewish people was rooted in the covenant God that God had made with the Jewish people. Remember, Jesus and all the disciples and most of the earliest members of the Christian church were Jewish. Beginning with Abraham back in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. In fact, Abraham is often referred to as Father Abraham or Abba Abraham because God's covenant starts with him. There are 3 separate passages in Genesis that describe this covenant that God makes with the Jewish people, which are often called what? The chosen people. They're found in Genesis 12, 15, and 17. These are perhaps the most significant scriptures in understanding Judaism, past, present, and future. I will be your God, and you will be my people is the root concept of the covenant found in all 3 of these scriptures. In Genesis 12, the first of these, God says to Abraham, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So the base of the covenant is this. 1, I will be your God, and you will be my people. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Yet, there is a second incredibly important dimension of this covenant that God is making with his chosen people. It comes through in 2 statements in that core scripture I just read. So that you will be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That second dimension of the covenant says that this chosenness is not just for you. It is for the entire world. It is for all people. People that are not related to you. People that are not of your ethnicity. People who don't speak your language. People you don't look like. People who you don't like. And people that don't like you. In fact, it will be a blessing to people who even are your enemies. Wow. This is unique. All sorts of people believed that their God or gods had chosen them and would bless them and curse their enemies. You could call this covenant a parochial covenant with a parochial God, a partial as opposed to an impartial God or universal God. It's about my God and my God alone. Now, guess what? Most of the Hebrew people love the first part of that covenant. As my chosen people, I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And they debated constantly the conditions of the covenant, such as the places where it talked about the need for them to abide by God's rules or commandments. Yet, there was almost universal amnesia about the second part of the covenant of God choosing them. What you might call the reason God chose the Jewish people, that you would be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Oops. Instead, they became obsessed with genealogical purity. In fact, Judaism came to define an ethnicity as much as anything else. If you were born to Jewish peasant parents, you were Jews and you were chosen. If you were not born to Jewish parents, then you were not a Jew. Later on, this was slightly amended. If you were born to a Jewish mother, you were Jewish. Now, the reason this was done was to increase the population of Jews, because the two-parent rule would have probably led to their extinction. Yet chosenness was exclusively for Jews. Chosenness and the benefits of chosenness were not for foreigners. And at that time, 99% of the people on the earth were foreigners from a Jewish perspective, not among the chosen. Non-Jews were treated by Jews generally as second-class citizens. It was a form of apartheid. Yet since the religions of nearly every other people, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Moabites, the Amorites, all had a similar apartheid system, it was easy to ignore this second part of the covenant. So again and again, God raised up prophets who called the people back to the true covenant, who reminded them that their true chosenness was not an exclusive privilege. It was intended to be a blessing to the whole world, and that included infidels, heretics, foreigners. In your bulletin, our first reading from Isaiah 56, you can see this broad intent and the inclusion of foreigners. Thus says the Lord, maintain justice and do what is right, for soon my salvation will come and my deliverance will be revealed. And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, all who keep the commandments and do not profane it and hold my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Thus says the Lord God, who gathers the outcast of Israel. I will gather others to them besides those already gathered. Now, knowing this, let's look at how Jesus deals with this issue of chosenness from the 15th chapter of Matthew. Again, this is in your bulletin. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. This is actually up in the very farther north. It's actually outside of Palestine. It's outside of Israel. It's in non-Jewish country. Just then a Canaanite, or non-Jewish woman from that region, came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And Jesus' disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. This rather strange passage is among the most consequential passages in the entire gospel, because in it Jesus powerfully confronts that exclusive apartheid understanding of chosenness and affirms in a foreigner, and a woman at that, among his highest affirmations, "Woman, great is your faith." Clearly, Jesus is mimicking the cultural view at the time when he talks about how she was not worthy, how she was excluded. Just look at the way it ends. Great is your faith. This may be one of the most significant theological axes that Jesus grinds. Sometimes theology matters, and Jesus here, in this issue of chosenness, is sort of like opening the gates that most Jews had long since bolted shut. You can see that typical attitude among Jesus' own disciples. "Send her away, for she keeps shouting at us, wanting you to heal her daughter." And yet in the next moment, Jesus is saying, "Great is your faith. Great is your faith." And he heals the woman's daughter. And this theological issue didn't get lost. After Jesus died and rose and ascended, it gets picked up by Peter, especially in Acts 10, when he visits a non-Jew named Cornelius. But it is especially picked up by Paul, the author of a quarter of the New Testament, and the person who started the churches throughout the Mediterranean Roman world. Paul is fiercely committed to this second part of the covenant made with Abraham in Genesis 12, that you will be a blessing to all the families of the world. Paul describes himself as the apostle called by the risen Christ to proclaim the gospel to Gentiles, non-Jews, the other 99% of the families of the earth. Now, to do this, Paul had to fight with many factions of the early church. Many early Christians wanted to adopt an exclusive, apartheid view of chosenness in the faith, but Paul prevailed. Had he not prevailed, we would not be here today, at least those of us without Jewish parents. Christianity would have remained a small sect at best. Yet thanks to passages like this one about a foreign woman that Jesus deems having great faith, Christianity shed this horrible Achilles heel of Judaism. But be careful about ever proclaiming victory against the deep and natural human tendency. We are vulnerable to the same tendency ourselves. Whenever we think that somehow our chosenness, our Christianity, our doctrinal purity, our rightness makes us special in an exclusive way, that somehow the rules don't apply to us, that we are different and God treats us different, then we find ourselves in grave danger. Jesus actually addresses this idea of chosenness and special blessing and protection abundantly clear again and again, not only in the passage that we read. In Matthew 5:45, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says this, "Your Father in heaven makes the sun shine on good and bad people alike, and he sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous alike." And in Luke 13:4, he uses the example of a tragedy that we would call an act of God, the collapse of the Tower of Siloam in Jerusalem, which collapsed, killing 18 people who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Jesus rejects any notion that God was punishing wicked people and protecting faithful people. In a sense, Jesus says, stuff happens. Get used to it. Yet there is something about us human beings, and especially religious human beings, that tends towards special views of chosenness, special blessings for us, special grace for us, special protection for us. Back in March, as community spread was just beginning to intensify with the coronavirus, I had a number of conversations with many colleagues. Because of the walk to Emmaus and a strong ecumenical bent, I have lots of friends from different church traditions, including in addition to the Methodist gang. In March, we here at Point Pleasant, like just about every church across the country and even the whole world, were developing a strategy on how we as a church would respond to the coronavirus, how we would keep one another safe and not making the problem worse through increasing the spread through our own congregation. You probably remember it was a very scary, scary time. Now, I tend to make decisions through lots and lots of dialogue coupled with a lot of internal pondering. So Jeremy, Carrie, and Ben and I met a great deal, and we had many, many long conversations. We also talked with the leadership council members here at Point Pleasant. In addition, I also had many conversations with dozens and dozens of other pastors and not just United Methodist pastors. There were many different perspectives that I took in, but I want to tell you about one friend of mine who I will not identify by name. This friend is a very faithful pastor. He cares about his congregation every bit as much as Neil and I care about you. He is bright and articulate. He knows his Bible. He lives out his faith. He's a good person. As we were talking on the phone, I asked him what he was thinking about doing. And he said this: we are not going to stop meeting in person for worship. Now, he didn't say the government can't tell us what to do, or this is about religious freedom or anything along those lines. Instead, he said this. He said, in my heart of hearts, I do not believe that God would allow a person to contract this virus when they are doing something good. And I absolutely believe that God affirms that worshiping him is one of the best things we can do. So I believe that God will provide a supernatural protection for Christians who gather for the purpose of worship. So that is what we are going to do. Now, my friend was not simply rejecting the scriptures we looked at today. It's a little more complex than that. He was looking at some other scriptures on God's protection. Scriptures like Deuteronomy 31:6, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid or terrified, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Even from the 23rd Psalm, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 121, the Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. And from Hebrews 13:6, so we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Now, you may have noticed that these scriptures, except for the one from Hebrews, are Old Testament, not new. And if you do some Google searches on lists of scriptures about the way God protects us, you will find few New Testament scriptures being listed. And you will practically find nothing coming from the Gospels, nothing from the mouth of Jesus. But there are scriptures that are there. Now, when my friend told me this, I didn't say to him, you're wrong. I simply said, I have a different understanding of chosenness and grace and the way God protects faithful people. And then I said, and I am certainly not absolutely sure that God acts in the way that you describe. My friend proceeded as he said he would through the month of March and into early April. But then a couple of weeks into April, he heard about another pastor who took that same understanding of chosenness, in which God wouldn't allow persons worshiping God to contract the illness in worship. Bishop Gerald Glenn of New Deliverance Evangelistic Church in Virginia, who not only contracted the illness together with others in his church, but died April 11th, less than 2 weeks after his last sermon. A sermon in which he insisted that God was bigger than this virus. That tragedy resulted in my friend rethinking the way God works and said that he was not absolutely sure about the way God protects Christians. And God forbid he would feel horrible if members of his church contracted the illness at church. Clearly, he was rethinking his theology of chosenness and specialness that God provides to Christians. I commended him for his humility. He could have said the easier route, like, I don't want to bring the law down upon the church, or I don't want to incur fines for the church, but that wasn't the reason. Last week's sermon was titled, Never Miss the Opportunity of a Storm. And I think this area of chosenness, which has been around in different forms since the very beginning of our biblical faith, is a good one for us to think about and maybe do some rethinking or recalibrating in the midst of this horrible pandemic, in the midst of this storm. It might lead to some good biblical work on our part. It might lead to some good conversations with Christians you respect. It might lead to you bringing some questions to Ben's Wednesday night Bible study class or one of the other classes that will be happening in September. It might lead to looking at scriptures on both sides of how chosenness is interpreted. Yet the bottom line is this: while there is much in the church and the things we think about that may not have huge consequences one way or the other, there are some things, and especially right now in the midst of this pandemic, where theology matters a lot. This is the good news of the gospel. Amen.